Good morning to you, Chris, in Manchester, UK, place that I really love. Been there twice, studied there, worked there, and I envy where you are. Let me do my standard work, otherwise, senseis like you will not forgive me. We've got a lot of things in common, including Sensei Masaki Mai. So here we go, a small, hey, here we go.
There we go.
Right. So welcome, Chris, to Dr. M's podcast. You're on the 60th episode of Dr. M's podcast, and it is dedicated to my sensei, Masaki Mai, passed on a year ago. Yeah, that's true. And you're on Dr.
Yeah.
M's podcast, and if you can see, podcast is spread across US, Canada, Jamaica, Europe, Indiana, and this is my mission, is to connect continuous improvement professionals across the world. So that's what I have been doing after the COVID hit us and I had nothing else to do. And you, I said, I was here and I am in Mumbai. And previous to that, I went off to Paris before this episode being recorded. The 59th episode was in Paris. And now I am with you in Manchester. Isn't it so beautiful that I can sit in my studio and reach out to you in Manchester, right?
Yes. It's a wonderful benefit of the modern world, isn't it? That we can connect
Yeah.
to people from all over. And it's interesting because I've just come to you today. All of this week I've been with a large corporate organization that move a lot of brown boxes around the planet, let's say. And I was with them, and we were working with a lovely team, which was, mixed people from all different backgrounds and locations. And yeah, the global nature of what we do is really kind of thrilling, really. So, and this being podcast 60 is quite meaningful to me because that I am in my 60th year. It's my 60th birthday this year, which is a nice milestone for me. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and I think
Great.
the power of these podcasts is only going to grow over time. That's my belief.
Thank you. And I will wish you on the date of your birth, okay, and not before that. That's the protocol that we have. So there you go. We are going to talk to us about the 40 years of improvement lessons learned. There we go. And well, this is what I said we have in common, that we studied in University. Of course, you lived over there, but I came over there to study. And I did stay there in a place called Ilkley, Yorkshire,
Yeah,
and I was with Rolls-Royce Bristol for some time, but that's something so nice. And then you are the founder, partner for Stark, a full-time over there, and the founder. How do you pronounce this? Lausanne?
Lausanne, yeah,
Lausanne?
Lausanne,
And what
yeah.
I really liked was the brand tag, or what you put it for your start, which is 90% of your process is waste. I said, I love this. So I just put it on, right? So,
Yeah, that's great.
so I'm
Yeah,
moving it over to you. And yeah, you had set the agenda for us. So this is the agenda that we'll be talking. And whenever you want, I'll put up the agenda. The agenda,
yeah.
how did uh, how did my journey start? What did I learn? How did I leave my home industry and become to be sectorless? What was the building on dotcom like? How did the savings turn from million to billions? What next
Yeah.
world of improvement? And then all the other things that you would like to present to us. And we are listening to you. And I'm going to stop sharing and over to you, Chris. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think it's I always, even in the field that we're in, I always introduce my self and my journey, because my journey was very atypical for an improvement person. I there are common themes that I have in common with people, but the journey that I took was rather unique, and I think a lot of it was because I started as a very curious child about two things, which I've subsequently learned is really rare, is that I was really interested in the way things work from a very young age. I was, playing with Lego and Meccano and all of these things, assembling things, and I very quickly grew tired of following the designs that were presented in the books to be made. And I wanted to start designing my own things and building my own stuff, like a child with, a vivid imagination does. And what I also was really fascinated about from a young age was people, other kids other than myself. And I realized, from a very early age that people and are individuals and they're all kind of different. We have common traits and sometimes we have things in common with each other. But, I was really interested in what made people do things and how people, from the early days. So before I even got into the world of work, I was making things and building things with a best friend of mine who I met very young, and he was a sort of master builder. He went on to become a and but from an early age, we were like partners in crime. We were building things and making tree houses and swings and basically thrill devices. Devices to give us the kind of exhilaration and thrills that we saw, we could make, and we became in our local neighborhood kind of like mini celebrities who could make, these things for kids. I grew up in a town that had been, extensively damaged during the war, and it was trying to rebuild itself. So there was all these sorts of things lying around that were, either things that had been destroyed and could be reassembled, or the new materials that were supposed to be rebuilding the homes and everything. And me and my partner in crime, we used to repurpose these, and I won't say we used to steal them. We used to borrow things, and then we used to build all of these things. So in many ways, when I ended up being interviewed for a job, there was a particularly influential guy. It was at the local aircraft factory, the military aircraft factory in Hull, in a place called Brough outside Hull. And there was a guy called Mike Ratig who interviewed me, and he described me as a natural engineer. He said, "You are a natural engineer. You've been, doing these things that we're doing since you've been young, and although I kind of struggled in the interview with a lot of the theoretical things, when he started asking about application of some of these theories, I could just, roll out example after example. So he said at the time, I'm not really sure what we're going to do with you, but I was building race engines at the time for motorcycles and carts, like the motorized carts, and was very successful. I built two championship winning engines by the age of 15. So, that was what they hired. And they put me through a sort of twin path, really. One was to be an apprentice aircraft fitter. So I started on the Gemba, you know, assembling aircraft, military aircraft. But at the same time, one day a week, they sent me to college. for a day and a night, and they said, "Look, we want you to train, and because you've, been practically focused and you haven't got a lot in the way of school qualifications, you're going to have to do it at night. But, we think it's going to be easy for you in the adult setting of a technical college." And so it turned out I spent 9 years studying and culminating in higher level qualifications in aeronautical engineering and production engineering. And that was the sort of academic journey that I took at the same time as learning how to, work with people on the shop floor, learning how to work in teams, learning how to, do all of that. And then my life was changed by political events because we were in that era, we were doing military aircraft to a cost plus contract. There was no drive whatsoever for efficiency because whatever you did and whatever activity we did, we got paid for it, whether it was waste or not. And even to my young mind, this seemed crazy. I just thought this is crazy. To bordering on the in my mind, bordering on the edges of morality, really. I was like, how on earth can we be charging our customers, who are the kind of taxpayers, how on earth can we be charging our customers for these things that we've done wrong, you know? And so that was a kind of natural thing. And then what happened politically, there was an earthquake in the UK because Mrs. Thatcher came to power. And her attitude was, well, if these people are not competitive, they'll just have to they'll just have to die, or they'll have to become competitive. And we were one of the first nationalizations that took place. Denationalization, sorry, my slip there. And so we were privatized, and she visited with us, she talked with our unions, and ultimately we set off on a journey of having to become competitive. So, to give you an idea of that, we'd developed an aircraft which was the Hawk jet, which had become the standard for training RAF pilots. We'd built about 100 of those jets for the Royal Air Force, and then all to this cost plus model. And then all of a sudden, we had to go on to the export market and receive none of that kind of funding. And moreover, the customers wanted, the jet tailoring to their needs, which was, meant that all of the design and engineering and everything had to have significant content. But the double hit on that was that the volumes were much lower. So instead of being able to amortize engineering costs over 100 aircraft, we were struggling to do it over 10. You can imagine that this. So we were introduced as an organization to Kawasaki. This for any of the Japanese car makers came to the UK, and Kawasaki Heavy Industries were they themselves adopting what I call Toyotaism. They were bringing us, knowledge of just in time and flow and all of those things. So we ended up applying those principles to our shop, first to our shop floor, and I mean, just dramatic transformation from this craft-based, garage, what the Italians would call garagista model, to a properly flowing, you know, assembly and manufacturing lines fed by cells on pull basis, all of this stuff that was going on. And I'd joined this department called production development because a mentor of mine had seen all this curiosity I was building race engines. So as soon as I heard the word Kawasaki, I was like, I don't care what we're doing, I'm going to be involved, you know. And what I realized was that the senior leaders they'd been on the trips to Japan, they'd been and seen everything, and they'd brought back all of this material and then left it really for us guys to say, you know, classic Western management. They delegated it and said, here's all these manuals, you know, you and all these things, go and apply it. And so that's what I did. I started applying these things on the shop floor. And then my boss at the time, this was after a few years, and we've got real, you know, we've fundamentally changed root and branch the flow of this aircraft through the factory and taken, you know, a flow time of years down to, you know, kind of months or so. And he sort of came to me one day when we were, you know, congratulating ourselves and having magazine articles and all of these things. And he just said, Chris, you know, these principles that you've been applying on the shop floor, he said, could you apply them to the technical functions? And I said, why? And he explained, you know, that the costs, um, although the costs of manufacturing had come down dramatically, it still wasn't enough of from a business point of view, it wasn't enough. You know, we had to significantly reduce the costs of the engineering and the productionization, if you like, of these different variants that the customers wanted. And so my answer, as my answer always is to this day, was I don't know. Maybe, maybe we can apply these principles to the flow of information as it turns from, you know, from needs into instructions on how to design and build the aircraft. So that became my mission. And unfortunately, there wasn't anything really in the way of hints from the Kawasaki material. It became clear to me that that was something they didn't want to share. And so I had to really apply from first what I thought were first principles at the time. And my first principles were pretty much aligned to what Womack and Jones subsequently wrote about. I mean, this was the area before, you know, before the machine that changed the world, and it was, you know, it was before the book Lean Thinking, but it was still, in my mind, from the sort of Kawasaki material that, you know, you start with this idea of kind of value and waste, and then you try and do something about that. So that became something that I was kind of made sort of famous for in the industry and won awards because I created, first of all, convinced people of the idea of what we now call an IPT, an integrated project team, multidisciplinary team, working in a studio type environment, which is what I call an obeya. And we managed to dramatically change not only the cost of design and but the quality of what was coming out. And you know, we then took that across the military aircraft space, and eventually that led to me leading the first production phase IPT on Eurofighter. And it was at that point that I started to correspond quite a lot with George Koenigsegger. So for any of the uh, listeners, you know, people will know that probably will know that George Koenigsegger was, amongst other things, was right at the kind of ground zero of the Danaher story. George was running a plant in called Jake Brake, which was acquired by Danaher in its infancy. The Rails brothers who started Danaher, you know, kind of acquired, and that was at a time when George was seeking help from the Japanese senseis that had built the Toyota system. So I started, correspond. You'll know, Dr. M, that back in those days there were very few of us doing anything, and we were sort of meeting each other at conferences, like orphaned aliens from Planet Toyota or whatever you want to call it, Planet Kawasaki. We were meeting each other, and we were all sort of starting to find these common connections of things that, and everybody was doing things, based on their own situations. And I really thank good fortune for the situation that I was placed in, because it really gave me a unique perspective. And actually, when George wrote his book, Leading the Lean Transformation, which I still recommend to anybody, especially senior leaders who are really interested in doing this. Um, I ended up writing the sort of new product development side, and helping him with, certain aspects of that. And I learned, a lot from George as well, particularly about how transformation should be viewed from the boardroom, um, in which, still to this day, most people don't think, they think it's something that should be delegated. So that's a kind of long-winded way of, saying sort of saying, um, how I got the start. Of course, included all sorts of trial and error, and because I was working from first principles. I mean, that's been made famous recently because of Elon Musk, but that's been the way I've been working since forever, is always go back to first principles and, see what is possible, when you're working from them. And many times, if you feel like you're getting stuck, I literally just go back and say, what's the value here, and what's the waste, and what's the thing or the things that are trying to flow, why aren't they flowing? So yeah, um, that would be, and then, when eventually George and a guy called Ed Constantine, who was another a very, very similar age to myself. In fact, I think Ed and I were the same age at the time. And Ed had a similar trajectory, but he'd been kidnapped by Mitsubishi and taken to Japan. And he'd been involved in, introducing new products. And so, we had the hypothesis that we were going to start an organization. This was Ed's idea, and it very quickly became, as kind of partners, it became, how do these principles apply universally, and can we create a company and an organization that can do this in any sort of place where human beings are working. So one of the jobs that entailed with myself and Ed, at one point we were really focused on this, was how do we take this stuff that's come out of the automotive world, um, and how do we change the language so that it can be done anywhere, and that, and also some of the Japanese jargon as well, because in some settings people really reject those words, and apart from a couple of terms, there are perfectly good local language terms for all of this stuff. So I've found that in particularly reluctant cultures, it's better just to say, well, what would you call this in your culture and language? And people very quickly, say, well, it's not a Kanban, it's it's this, so yeah, so we start simpler consulting was really based on the hypothesis that this can work everywhere. And so I spent just over a decade with George and with Ed and with various others, John Kim and Mark Hafer and Mike Chamberlain, some and really really great people. We grew that until we were like three figures of employees worldwide. It was a virtual company in that the office was a website and the workforce was spread around the world and that we did work at our customers' sites, so we had no overhead. We had very very good fees that we were returning on that investment that our customers were making was 10 to 1. That was our guarantee. So yeah, so that was a really formative experience because it meant that we had to change the language of lean in order for it to land anywhere where work is done. And that's what I'm sort of known for is going. I was known within Simpler and now around the world for going into places where this has never been done, introducing the ideas and making dramatic change. And that's for me, that's the change that I get out of bed for is change that is measured in the billions now. How can we, make help organizations really, really make seismic level of change that, the people in the boardroom are going to get excited about. So, so you must have some questions about that for sure. Or, um,
Yeah, let me check up the agenda so that we are on the same footing. Here we go. So there we go. What is it about building a dot-com like? That is me, the virtual?
yeah. That was really, I mean, the only way I can describe it is exhilarating. It was exhilarating because there were sort of no rules really, and there was only really in our minds, opportunity. And the opportunity was that, you could, we didn't really realize it at the time, but being able to run from a laptop, and wander into a coffee shop with a rucksack and your office in the bag. I mean, bearing in mind this is now sort of 25, more than 25 years ago. And being able to envisage a globally reaching organization that didn't have an office. I mean, we used to have an office, shall we say, or a Gemba or an Obeya as a management team in particular. We used to come together and we used to assemble, a sort of office in a hotel conference room. And we used to do things like hiring cells. If we were going to hire, we would set up a place in a hotel. We would build, the hiring process was based on flow. So we could go from interview to offer within 3 hours. And, we could literally, people would be walking away with some feedback and the basis of an A3 to do some personal development if that was the case, or they would be walking away with a contract. And we were able to go from, finding candidates to people being on the job within sort of what are still sort of record times, really. And then also things like our annual get together, where this is, before the days of video conferencing and all of those things. We used to just come together, usually in the US, and just get together for a week and share experiences and share stories. And that's really how the company culture was made cohesive. Was we had the business system. So in fact, I've got a little card on here actually from my friends at Nissan. I've got a few of these. The Nissan way, it just happens to be on my. I was with some ex-Nissan guys just this week, and we used to have the our company way, and we used to have that boiled down to a sort of set of recipe cards. And one of the principles was distill, don't duplicate. So how do we distill all of our knowledge rather than, build this system of 1,000, 150 page PowerPoint? How do we actually distill all that down into its very essence? And I was, a personal champion of that all the time, was like, let's get rid of everything that doesn't add any value to us and let's try and keep it as, as distilled as possible. So that was people used to go into our clients armed with this, amazingly distilled essence of a system that they could then teach. And ultimately, they knew that it would work wherever work was done and wherever there was a pull from the customer. The big issue with the dot-com back then was it wasn't until people started, you know, talking about so the older generation of partners, they started to think about their retirement and how they were going to move on and exit the business, and also organizations started sort of, you know, inquiring about us and, with a view to, acquisition, that we really realized, I certainly speaking from myself, that we sort of realized what we built. And then there was this funny period where the people who were trying to buy us were really struggling to sort of value this business that had, in many ways, no sort of physical assets, but it had this, a massive and amazing goodwill in the marketplace, and this USP of being able to save 10 times its fees and drive those to the bottom line. So that was, and of course what happened was, what caused that was the size of the stories that we were generating. And we were working by this point, in DoD, we were working with the Ministry of Defence in the UK, and the savings were in their billions, by this point already. So yeah, that was a really interesting time. And building the dot-com was, let me say it this way, because most people, when I say this, they say they never thought it like that. Because the business had no infrastructure, if you like, physical, traditional infrastructure. In my mind, the infrastructure became almost always all the people. It became the people were the company. I mean, I know people say that now. People say things like that now. But back then, that was really like, yeah, actually, the company is just these people and their laptops and their internet connections and their families who they leave on a, Sunday night and go to a customer site, and their customers they're working with, and you know, their own sort of personalities, and add all this to this methodology. And who needs a building? Who needs a building? Who needs an ERP system? Who needs all of these things that a traditional a business needed? We didn't need. So it was, it really felt like, it felt like breaking new ground.
Chris, it just occurred to me. It's off my cuff, as you say. And since we're talking about artificial intelligence, and since you were associated with George Gunnar and we have a lot of models of lean. You got TPS, you got Dana Business System. And you just pointed out the importance of people. And I had interacted with Dennis Dio Parker, Ernie Richardson, who had a lot of emphasis on human capital formation in Toyota. Now,
Yeah.
to you, Chris, is this question: how do we really make the Gen Zs, the Millennium kids, the Alpha kids, who don't have time? I mean, their time span is short. It may be long, but I'm very amazed that my son can spend hours playing gaming.
Mm.
So that their focus being short is not the issue. How do we attract them? And we are the bridge to take them across, despite so much of dystopia, disturbances, and all these junk that has been floating around in the world called fake lean, this lean, that lean, that people have become totally disappointed. Because Sensei Masaki Mai, as you know him, we're all Gemba guys. We are not
Yeah.
PPT guys. But how do we attract this? And this is the words of wisdom that I want from you, because I'm studying Deming. And
Yeah.
I'm having this launch where the Jackie Grab, who worked with Deming, well, she was the intern with Deming for the last 5 years of his life. She's going to talk to us about what Deming would have done. Okay, so Chris,
Mm.
how do I attract? Because how do I link this up? All my podcasts, etc. I bet there's nobody from that population, whoever listens to my podcast. Okay, so how do we attract them to this? How do
Uh,
I attract this Gen Zs who are going to be CEOs? And I'm sure lean will still exist. Everything that we are undergoing will be there. Nothing is
yeah.
going to change. The basics will be basics. As a,
Well,
as a matter of fact, Chris, it was humorous that I was going through Deming it. Yesterday, I was talking to Jackie about it, and there's one chapter in which this lady, I forget her name, asked Deming. The question was, Dr. Deming, which organization is adopting Deming 100%? At that point of time, he said, none.
none. Yeah.
If nobody's adopting your philosophy 100% now, 100 years from now, who will be adopting it? And Deming came with a crisp response: those who survive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
I think
yeah,
for all, difficult. I'm doing this because amongst friends, and I know that this will sort of go out into the universe. But I think that all of the people who have been on that, who we name check on that journey, some of these sacred individuals who have, been founders of the movement. I mean, I keep reading the kind of the text, and in fact, the other day I was only just exhuming a piece of stuff from Taylor, F.W. Taylor. And as you know, Dr. M, I live right next door to Manchester's Museum of Science and Industry. And whenever I want to, feel like I need some deep thoughts, and I just literally go into that industry museum and I walk around and I try to kind of connect back to the spirit of the people who built and used these sorts of things back in the day. It's amazing. We actually have what is a flow cell, ironically with a Platt Brothers loom in the middle of the museum. And if you want to, you can take Toyota fans, you can actually take them to Platt Brothers, in Lancashire here. We can actually go and show them the birth of some of this thing. You want to see a Jidoka device? What better way than to see it on a Platt Brothers, on a Platt Brothers loom? And of course, even the people in the museum would probably be shocked if I said that that Jidoka device that was licensed from Japan and Toyota and was responsible for a revolution. But I think the issue is this. I think that there's a couple of things that you really pick up on there, which I think the lean movement hasn't addressed and hasn't really been kind of honest with itself. And that is that, you know, it if the first principle, let me quote Womack and Jones actually, if they've codified the first principle as defined value, how many transformations actually genuinely start with that as a first principle? My experience is most of them, none of them, because people apply these things to the existing definition of value. And also, the other thing is that I make a point of doing two things usually with organizations, which is going and having some moments of truth with the customers. I did that myself in the aircraft industry where I famously took my team to a working operational military base and we stayed with the team there in the north of Scotland and we watched the old product being used. And we learned more in that week. I had designers saying, I've learned more in this week than I've learned in 20 years of doing design. Because so what we were doing was we were really challenging ourselves to what is the value that we're trying to produce here. I don't think the lean movement does that enough at all. And I think the second mistake that lean people in particular seem to make is they seem to be so keen to project their own version of value onto customers. The amount of times hear people say, no, 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 what you want, or no, what you need is this. And when you project your own definition of value onto the customer, all it really does is or within an organization that you've only just kind of met, all it does is really show a shortcoming in your application of the principles. So I think that's a sort of vital miss by the lean movement, right? And the thing is that the story of Toyota is a multi-decade story of a family firm. Let's not forget that a family firm struggling to be successful in a particular set of people and a setting that it's found itself in. So the system has evolved as a response to their problems and to their situation and to their need to be successful. And for them as a business, being successful is, we build people before we build cars. All of that stuff, is what they say now, but they certainly weren't saying that at the beginning of their transformation. In fact, Toyota himself was saying, we've got to survive. We've got to catch up with America or we will be dead. So what I think is a big error in, modern day improvement movement is one, a failure to really recognize where the organization is that you are actually currently working with. Are they not typically 2025 Toyota? So taking them to Japan to have a look at, you know, a company that's been doing lean for 100 years is not appropriate. It just like taking, you might want to take I'm saying this because my eldest son became a gymnast, okay? It was okay to take him to a gymnastics competition at the age of 4 years old and say, yeah, that's what it looks like. But, you know, that's one day. It took him 20 years in the gym and doing competitions at various levels to actually become eventually an international gymnast. It's going on a study tour and seeing, an organization that's 60 years into its transformation can actually be counterproductive. And I saw that often, when I used to try to take people. I once took a bunch of surgeons to Nissan, and they were applauding. They were literally stood by the line applauding, watching a team of people putting a powertrain into a vehicle. And the other thing which really shocked them was three different products, three different um, car models going down the same line. I mean, real sort of, advanced stuff that lean geeks or improvement geeks like me would be thinking is, fantastic to watch. But surgeons they hadn't got a clue what they were looking at. And they didn't really know that it was what they were looking at was, 60, 70 years worth of improvement. So I think that's the issue. And that, one of the issues is the training and the guidance and coaching that we're given truly appropriate to the situation that people are in. And then I want to go really heavy on the people, which is, and are we training and guiding people to make their journey that they need to make at their pace? Are we genuinely interested in I measure myself in two ways as a sensei, yeah. And the number one way is how many people have I helped on this journey? That's it. Like how many people have I helped? And that is a long, long game that I'm playing. Just to give you a clue, I'm working with a customer this week, global company, and a lady who's called me in and said, "Can you help us with this half of or half of all the improvement that goes on?" I'm only being cryptic because I'm under, kind of strict instructions because this is going to make a seismic difference to the organization. It's really about the way, fundamentally the way the organization improves on a global scale. And I first met her 12 years ago on an improvement event, a Kaikaku improvement event, step change improvement event. And I spoke to her and sort of mentored her for whilst I was with the company. A lot of people do that. I had one this week who came up to me and said, I heard you were here. I read one of your books. I'm in the improvement team. What can you help me? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I said, connect with me on LinkedIn and I'll help you for as long as you want help. And if you don't need my help, I won't be there. And if you need my help, I'll be there. Well, this lady, she called me 10 years in and she said, Chris, I'm now in a position where I can actually make really big, meaningful change within this organization. And I've been given this task to do it. You know, where are you? And I said, where are you? And she said, I'm in London. I said, I'll be there on Monday. I'll be there on Monday because, and I'll help you, lay out the way of him. And started with one person in this organization, which was her. We're now in, we're now after a few months, 100 people in. And these are all people who have come to this change and this improvement because my fundamental approach is we have to create pull first and foremost. We have to understand the value of improvement in the organization and we have to create pull from the people themselves. How can I get involved in this mission? How can I get involved in that's the people we want. So I think there's been it's a long way of me answering this question, but I think the fundamental error within the lean movement has been one, we've allowed it to become delegated into organizations, into the middle of organizations, and we've also allowed it to become something that's compelled and something that's, people have to do. Now, when you're joining a new organization that's already based on lean, say if I joined Toyota in the 1990s, that's easy because the organization already does all that stuff and it already believes all of those things and the leaders already. But the fundamental flaw in the lean movement is it's never have I seen published yet what do you have to do when you're entering an organization that has to unlearn an old operating system and adopt this new one. And for that, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to, unlearning is as hard, if not harder than learning. And 99% of our lean activities or our improvement activities are in those kind of companies, not unless, you're a startup. And that's when I meet young improvement professionals, I give them two pieces of advice. I say, if you can't create a pull within your organization, then create your own organization. Start a business where you can define a new value proposition. You can architect the whole thing from day one on the things that you've learned about. And actually then you won't have to undergo the process of trying to rewire or upgrade an organization.
George, I am giving you entire population of the Millennium kids and the Gen Zs who are the students, the future CEOs. How are you going to create a pull them towards the lean basic way of thinking? It is not being lean, it is not doing lean. How do you make them start thinking lean from now?
Well,
I'm not even going to the school levels or college levels. I'm just well, probably to the college levels. Because what they
yeah,
teach, the professors that teach, the best I know in the Indian context, they have never been exposed to a gambler. They must have read
yeah,
a couple of books and they would teach them what it is. And they use more Japanese words than they can pronounce their own. So,
yeah.
uh, how do I create this pull amongst the younger generations to
Well, that's not
because
that
I'll tell you why. Because it's going to take them another 20 plus years when they become a CFO or a CEO. That, like this lady you're mentioning, it took her 10 years to come back to you because she was in
yeah.
position.
Yeah, I think, I would actually and I'm doing this in a small way, because I'm trying to multiply the number of people that I'm able to help along the journey. And I'm working in some with some AI stuff to be able to do that. But I think how do we get, kids? Let's talk about them as kids now. How do we get kids now to pull for this stuff that we do? Well, what we've got to start being honest about is if you do this stuff, if you learn this stuff, it'll make your life easier, safer, more fun. It'll make everything in your kind of working life on and your home life, if you want to apply it there, it'll actually make things easier, safer, and more fun. The trouble is that the only thing is it's a little bit hard at the beginning. Now, if my son was here, he would be able to talk to he's obviously in his 20s. He's able to talk to his generation and say, the way I became, an international gymnast was because my dad used to do this thing, and we were brought up in a house where, we understood this difference between value and waste. And he calls it sort of dark matter. I use the term dark matter now. Your life has got all this stuff which helps you and all this other stuff which makes life harder. And I think, all this week, I can't remember how many times I said it this week, but when I've been meeting people in the business, I've been saying, do you want to make your work safer, easier, happier, and more fun? You know, do you want to make saving billions of dollars easier, safer, faster, and more fun. And if you do, look, try thinking about it like this rather than thinking about it like that. I think what we tend to do is we tend to make people believe that doing this stuff is really hard, but it's much harder not doing it. It's much harder, trying to drag yourself up in the morning and wading your way through waste. So I think the next thing for the world of improvement is to really start to change the nature of the language of this stuff and start to make it a positive sell rather than a kind of, rather than what it can be. You'll never shame anybody into world class. You'll never do that. You'll only ever encourage people who are willing and, make people pull for help if once, for things that they really want to do. And most people want to be more successful. They want to be safer. They want to have more fun. And they want to be able to, be learning and constantly curious about things. It's only those things are sort of taken out of us, and people believe that they've done with their learning, when they leave university or college or school or whatever. So how I'm starting to change that in my approach is that first of all, I have interests in a very interesting manufacturing company. We make very early stage prototypes. It's a wonderful business. It's connected to the automotive industry, but it allows me to sort of, go visit occasionally and really just, meet those young kids, the young designers and the young engineers and apprentices, which I'm really a champion of the apprenticeship system. And I'm also really a champion of getting school kids work experience, but in positive environments. I want. I always think if it was my friend's kid or my kid, what sort of experience in work would I give them? Well, the first thing I'd want them to bring them in is in an improvement activity, something that starts, at one point and then ends up at a better point during the week, or the month or whatever it is. So I think that's how we get the kids involved. The really great thing about AI, and I'm going to descend into jargon a little bit, is AI. I'm working with guys who are working on the cutting edge of AI at the moment, and we're feeding these models because I've learned a lot about that. In fact, I actually asked AI to. I've got an unpublished manuscript, and I asked AI to write me the foreword or a critique of my manuscript by Stuart Deming, oh no, and these all the luminaries of the movement. I asked AI to write me a foreword to the book, and it was absolutely fantastic. And then from that, I had this spark of an idea, which was Yokoten is one of the hardest things to achieve within any kind of transformation. How do we get ideas that were done, let's say, in a facility in the northeast of England? How do we get that tomorrow into a facility in South America, Mexico, or something? Well, the Yokoten, the sort of whole sharing of information, I believe that is something that can be accelerated by AI. And when AI is good, I mean, sometimes you read it and it's garbage, don't you? Because some of it is dragging on misinformation, disinformation. That's, I guess, the real danger with this stuff. But this is what the AI guys are teaching me, is when it's really guided and the guardrails are around it and it's the good stuff, it can actually really shorten that whole thing. So if I was to say to people, we've got this particular problem that we're trying to deal with, and first things first, I'm going to ask around the world all of the solutions that have been you brought to bear so far on this kind of problem? Can you assemble them all together as preparation for this human activity we're going to do? Then, that's going to save us lots and lots of time and effort. And then we can sort of humanize it by saying, right, what do we want to embrace? What things do we want to try locally? So I think, that's just a little hint of where I think. And that generation, I used to say, in fact, you've triggered a really good thought. I used to say to my business when I used to wander around as a young kid, I used to say, where can I access all of the 100 years of learning that this industry has already had before I joined? Where do I find that out? And they said, oh, you'll have to go to, you'd have to go and have a speak to the people who are dead, because the knowledge left with the people because it was all kept up here. And I believe that the future generation has a right to be able to say, no, 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 we don't, we've changed our technology now. The knowledge should be available to be able to be pulled from, the pool of knowledge that we've assembled. And that's where I think AI can really help us. And I think we can get the young kids interested. I've got I can't speak too much about it, but I've got a young kid, 15 years old, who's going to come with me. It's looking like he's going to come with me and spend about a month with me, going into various organizations and seeing how we improve work. That's the kind of stuff we need to be doing, is we need to be showing these kids, what this sort of stuff can do. And as I said, like, probably like a broken record now, what's going to make work safer, happier, more fun, and, feel like you're really making a difference. Because when you do a day's work and the balance of that day's work is more value added than non-value added, you feel fantastic. You feel fantastic. If you're stressed at work, I have call it Cooper's Law. I've got a few of them, but one of mine is that your mood and your feelings at work are directly proportional to the amount of waste you have to wade through to get your job done. So, what better way to bring a new generation in and solve for the productivity problems by saying, let's join together to do this stuff?
I'll tell you, we're come to an hour, so I won't take much of your time. But here is my hypothesis, which I want your wisdom. A, when I look at the kids gaming, what do they have?
Mm.
A, they are not getting judged. They are in a very safe atmosphere. They are competing with somebody unknown who will not judge them. Okay.
Yeah,
Second thing, they are improving their skills. They have got the competitiveness. They are improving their skills. There is no judgmental thing. There is no fear of failure. Even if they don't upgrade themselves, it is between him and the computer. So there is no fear of failure. There is joy of work. There's
yeah,
enjoyment. I mean, I'm going
yeah,
back to Deming. There's joy of
yeah,
work. And
yeah,
if and don't tell me they don't have time, Papa, send me a message, don't talk to me, no, they have. They will play their game for 6 hours, 7 hours, confined to themselves in a total environment. Can I produce a gamba with that sort of environment? Second, with respect to artificial intelligence, where I'm coming from is there are layers that, as you know, you have data, you've got information, you've got understanding, and then you get knowledge, and then you get wisdom, right? Now, AI is not going to give you knowledge at all unless the information provided is understood by you,
mm, yeah.
put into
I think,
practice, and that becomes a knowledge. Wisdom is something unique. I'm not getting into that. So, all what, sir, you are saying and the artificial intelligence can produce, or what this call as knowledge management, etc., is still information management unless and until a human being starts understanding what that information is all about.
Yeah,
Then you get a knowledge on a particular situation. Information remaining the same, the situation changes, the knowledge on that situation would change.
yeah, yeah.
So,
I agree. I agree. And I
and I'm not even coming to sensei's wisdom, which you have with why do you have the sensei's wisdom? Is that you dirtied your hand? That's what my sensei Masaki Mai used to tell me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember a very strange situation when I was working, with the Kawasaki guys way back when. And I was a junior executive at the time, and we were in an improvement activity, and they needed something welding. And they said, we were working through interpreters and everything, and they said, "Oh, this needs welding." And I remember I said, "I'll weld that." And they all looked at me and, all through the interpreter, it's like, "You know how to weld?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah. Before I put this shirt and tie on, I used to make aircraft and put them together with my hands, and I can weld and I can operate a machine and everything." And what was amazing was the relationship changed instantly. It changed from, the cliche Japanese, way of the insultant, to actually a kind of a nurturing experience. And I think that, that's the key, especially with the young kids, is we can't blame kids for not learning some of these things and not knowing, how to do something from scratch. But what we can do is we can help them in their world, and we can actually say, look, here's some ways to think about things. I often say, here's some principles to think about. How do they apply, to your hobbies? How do you apply? I used to be into, what you said earlier really resonated with me. I was really, really an early adopter in the sport, now they call it, of skateboarding. I mean, really was crazy, crazy into skateboarding. And famously, on the YouTube, there is a film of me bringing sort of Tony Hawk to the UK and driving around in a transit van, van. And before anything, where we were ridiculed, for be as adults by this time, I was like in my late teens. Why are you riding on these kids' toys and all of this kind of thing? But yeah, that was a culture created around mutual support. There were no coaches. We were learning, we were coaching each other. We were learning things. The only kind of ego that was in the whole thing was if you invented a trick, it was named after you, like gymnastics, right? So, we created this kind of culture of self-help. And it's amazing, isn't it? Because that goes all the way back to Toyota himself when he said that one of the most important books that he read was Samuel Smiles' Self-Help. And so, when I think about self-help, I actually don't think about self. I think about self as in all of ourselves. How do we help each other? And I talk to my friends and, professional colleagues. I say, look, we're like orphaned aliens who've landed on planet waste. And we walk among everybody, but we see things in a different way. And we're never going to change millions of people overnight. None of us are going to be able to do that. But what we can all do is we can all commit to helping others, helping people who want to learn this stuff. That's my sort of approach is anybody who wants to learn, I'm here. Anybody who wants to learn, doesn't matter what age, but as soon as I make it applicable to them and I make it applicable to, something that's important to them, then, how can we do that with less waste and with more value? I mean, that's what I did. I didn't want my son, my eldest son, to be a mini Chris. What I wanted him to do was to do what his passion was, which turned to be gymnastics. And then we worked out, and I ended up working with his coach, his coach, who's trained more international gymnasts, is the sort of one of the most decorated British coaches. We have a mutual sensei relationship. I go and talk to him. He talks to me. We talk about coaching methods. We talk about, so we've made innovations in each other's fields by talking with it. And those innovations will, there are kids learning that sport now that are being able to build on those innovations that, even I've helped, have a part in that. So I think that's the thing, is to just embrace the new generation. Don't give them some sort of crazy barrier of entry, that you have to go through this purgatory, in order to be, it's get rid of all that nonsense, and just help them with something that's important to them. So the gamification is really by the way, this is you'll be interested in this. One of the things in the company that I'm currently working with is every workstation has a games screen.
No.
It's because how do we get a new generation into the workforce? They want that stuff.
Yeah,
They want,
Sensei, you just earned the title of a Sensei from me because Sensei is like the term guru in India. It's not it's not a rank that is given to yourself, but it is acknowledged by the disciple. So I have become your disciple right now, Sensei Chris Cooper, uh, for letting me know as to there are ways to pull the younger generation into whatever they want. You call it lean,
yeah,
whatever it is, whatever is comfortable to them. So all the nostalgic memories, as I said, about UK, University of Hull, and most of all, I spent 18 years in the aviation industry. And
yeah,
when
yeah,
I started, it was cost plus basis. So
yeah.
thank you very much for your wisdom, Sensei Chris Cooper. Catch you up
Well,
on Dr. M's launch soon. Thank you
well,
very
thank you too, Sensei Dr. M.
much. See you.
We'll keep corresponding and keep sharing this knowledge. And remember the measure. The measure is how many other people have we been able to help with this wisdom.
Hopefully they apply it. Thank you very much.
Hopefully. Bye bye now. Bye bye.